Good evening, everyone. Thank you for being here and joining us for Virtual Insider Views. I'm Kate Marina, Associate Director of Membership at the San Diego Museum of Art, and it's my great pleasure to welcome you to our evening of conversation with Cauleen Smith. Thank you for being here tonight and for your support of the museum through your membership. Before I introduce the artists and our panelists, a few housekeeping notes. After the conversation, the panelists will answer some audience questions. To submit a question, click on the Q&A option on the bottom of your screen, and a pop-up will appear for you to type your question. To introduce yourself and say hello to your fellow viewers, you can use the chat function. Just select all panelists and all attendees. And now I'd like to introduce you to tonight's guests. Cauleen Smith is an interdisciplinary artist whose work reflects upon the everyday possibilities of the imagination. Operating in multiple materials and arenas, Smith roots her work firmly within the discourse of mid-20th century experimental film. Drawing from structuralism, third world cinema, and science fiction, she makes things that deploy the tactics of activism in service of ecstatic social space and contemplation. Smith enjoys container gardening, likes cats, and collects disco balls, vinyl records, and books. She is also an avid functional cyclist. She lives in Los Angeles and is art program faculty at California Institute for the Arts. She received her BA in Creative Arts from San Francisco State University and her MFA from University of California, Los Angeles, School of Theater, Film, and Television. Smith's short films, feature film, and installations and performance work showcased at International Film Festival Rotterdam 2019. Her solo show, Mutualities, at the Whitney Museum of American Art resumes this summer until December 2020. Her SF MoMA show will launch summer 2020. Her solo show, Give It or Leave It, has traveled nationwide. A major survey of Smith's work was on view at Mass MoCA until April 2020, and the centerpiece of that show, We Already Know What We Need, will travel to Cam Houston, winter 2021. Smith is the recipient of the following awards: Rockefeller Media Arts Award, Creative Capital Film and Video, Chicago 3 Arts Grant, the Foundation for Contemporary Arts, Chicago Expo Artadia Award and Rauschenberg Residency, Herb Alpert Awards in the Arts in Film and Video 2016, United States Artists Award 2017, and she was the 2016 inaugural recipient of the Ellsworth Kelly Award. Our second panelist is Victoria Sancho Lobis, who recently joined Pomona College as the Sarah Rempel and Herbert S. Rempel 23 Director of the Benton Museum of Art at Pomona College, which will open to the public in the fall of 2020. Lobis also serves as affiliated faculty in Pomona's Art History Department. Prior to her work at the Benton, Lobis worked for the Art Institute of Chicago from 2013 through 2019 in a variety of curatorial and administrative roles, including her service as interim chair of the Department of Prints and Drawings from April 2016 through May 2017. In September 2019, she completed a multi-year project related to the museum's holdings of Dutch and Flemish drawings, culminating in a scholarly catalog and exhibition of the same name, Rubens, Rembrandt, and Drawing in the Golden Age. Before the Art Institute, Lobis worked for 4 years as the inaugural curator of the print collection at the University of San Diego. She has also held curatorial internships and fellowships at the J. Paul Getty Museum and the Metropolitan Museum of Art. Lobis received her BA from Yale College, her MA from Williams College, and her Ph.D. from Columbia University, where she wrote her dissertation on workshop practice in the time of Peter Paul Rubens. She has curated and co-curated exhibitions across a broad geographical and historical range, including projects treating medieval manuscript illuminations, early modern prints and drawings, viceregal Latin American painting, Whistler and his influence, modern and contemporary Latin American works on paper, and contemporary American drawings. She has also published in the fields of contemporary artist books and contemporary American photography. Our third panelist, who I'm sure you recognize, is Michael Brown, Curator of European Art at the San Diego Museum of Art. Since joining the museum in 2014, he has overseen the complete redesign of the museum's galleries of European art, as well as the acquisition of works by Zurbaran, Baldisleal, Ribera, Wanda Mesa, Sorolla, Holtzius, and Lucas Chronic. While completing his doctoral dissertation in New York, NYU's Institute of Fine Arts on 17th and 18th century portraiture in Mexico, Brown served as the Mayer Curatorial Fellow at the Denver Art Museum. He has taught at the University of Colorado and the University of Denver, and is the author of numerous articles on Spanish portraiture and the history of collecting Hispanic art. His recent exhibitions at the San Diego Museum of Art include Divine Desire, Printmaking, Mythology, and the Birth of the Baroque, Venetian Views, Bruegel de Canaletto, Masterpieces from the Grisette Collection, and Art and Empire, the Golden Age of Spain. Thank you to all three of our panelists for joining us, and now I'll turn things over to Michael.
Thank you so much, Kate, and thank you all for joining us for this, our very first virtual Insider Views. And I'm absolutely thrilled to welcome Cauleen Smith. Thank you, Cauleen, for being here, and thank you, Victoria, for being here. I'm really looking forward to our conversation, and thanks again to Victoria for really bringing us all together. I don't want to do much of the talking tonight. I think Cauleen and I and Victoria and Anita, we've all had some really fruitful conversations over the last, I think a couple of years, no? And about the development of this project, and at the heart, it rests on Cauleen's creativity and her affection for one of our paintings in our collection that I'll show in a minute. But Cauleen, I know you maybe you could talk a little bit about the Sánchez Cotán, and that's sort of how the whole thing got started. No?
Yeah, I think, you know, that's a painting that you see in print everywhere, but to encounter it in person, when I first moved to San Diego, I think this was back in 2007 or 8. Really, I still don't really know I still don't have the words, and I've tried to talk to each of you about it at length about what it is exactly about that painting that just makes me so breathless and intrigued and engaged. But I found myself visiting that painting as often as I could when I lived in San Diego. It could be the geometry, it could be the simplicity, the humility, it could be the beautiful rendering, the light, the shadows. I'm not sure why this painting just intrigued me so much, but it really sent me down this rabbit path of just trying to understand what it was about still lifes in general that I was really attracted to. You know, in contemporary art, still lives are still kind of dismissed or thought of as either conservative or irrelevant or just marginalized. And so being a contemporary artist, I was like, what, like, it just seems, is this really retrograde, this like real love I have of this genre and this painting in particular. And then I started to identify other artists, other paintings, or other artists actually that I thought it's just such an interesting thing to devote one's practice to, you know.
And Victoria, if you want to jump in here and just talk about a little bit how, you know, the project got started, and Victoria, if I could just turn it over to you for a minute.
Yes, yeah, well, thank you, Michael and Cauleen. Thank you all for joining us tonight. This is such a joyful moment, I must say. I'm delighted to be here with you, and as I'm listening to you, Cauleen, I'm just realizing this project is so meaningful because I think it really testifies to the power of individual relationships and the relationship that, you know, we can build with people we work with or get to know, and also the individual relationships that we can all initiate and sustain with works of art who survive over time and allow their makers to speak, you know, beyond the grade, as it were. So yeah, this project for me originated when Cauleen and I collaborated previously, and I'm afraid I'm probably never gonna leave her alone because we just seem to have a good time, and I really have learned so much in our conversations. And, you know, Michael and I study the 17th century as our primary area of interest, and the pleasure of discussing, you know, a subject matter that you've brought your scholarly skill to bear on with someone who has a totally different relationship with that artist and that work is so fulfilling and illuminating. And for us, Cauleen and I started this conversation, I guess already in maybe 2016 or 2017, when I was at the Art Institute of Chicago, and we presented a series of Cauleen's drawings called Humans 3.0 Reading List, which I recommend to all of you to look into. It was a series of drawings of book covers that suggest a new canon of humanistic literacy, still relevant in those times and powerfully relevant today. And Cauleen was generous enough to walk through the galleries with me then. And we saw some vice-regal Latin American art. And then we saw the Chicago picture, the Sánchez Cotán in the Art Institute collection. And we just started talking about her interest in 17th century still life. And the rest is history. So for me, this project is, such a testament to friendship and the power of sustained dialogue, even when you're coming to a question from really different, points of view. And also, proof that dreams do come true, which is an uplifting reminder in these challenging times.
Yeah.
But to go back to Cauleen, when we first started talking about this particular project, I looked into some of your previous work, and you had these dialogues with 17th century artists, actually 17th, 18th, 20th century artists. And with the Sánchez Cotán, you started to have an idea of the void in the painting. And I'll show a picture, if you don't mind, of what you constructed in your studio. But if you wanted to share a little bit about the construction of the void box and the meaning of the void,
Sure.
as a way to jump into our look at Sánchez Cotán and your work specifically.
Talk about dreams coming true. Like the moment that Michael, you said, yes, let's do this. We want you to respond to this painting. I thought, really? And then I thought, oh no, because I think this painting is so absolutely marvelous. The prospect of putting something next to it or in the same room with it that could actually share space with it in a way that did it justice was like very quickly something I had to really, really approach, you know what I mean? And take on, and started just studying this painting and talking with Victoria and you both, and reading as much as I could. And the thing about Cotán, I think that really started to stand out, and I think was the thing about that painting that I just still find so alluring, really was that void. It really was this black space that it's so indeterminate in terms of where it's going or what's behind there. It makes it really confusing regarding time of day, even though there are shadows. It's not brown and it's not ombre, it's black. It's like a very willful void that in other paintings that he made, he filled in with other objects. And so that became, in this one, that he arrived at this sort of arrangement of objects that didn't obscure or block the void, but actually just sort of like framed it or provided almost like a portal into it. That seemed like something that I could distill and really think about, and speaks to a lot of the mystery of the painting and maybe some of the spiritual dimensions that a lot of people like to apply to Cotán's work,
Well, we had the opportunity to see this painting on a number of occasions, but perhaps most dramatically, I think, when we brought the painting together with the Velasquez from the National Gallery of Ireland in Dublin. We had both of these paintings side by side, and of course Sánchez Cotán influenced Velasquez, or Velasquez was very much inspired by Sánchez Cotán. So to have these two next to each other was wonderful, but it was also an amazing experience because you had looked at the Velasquez painting yourself in an earlier work.
Yeah. I mean, that painting was sort of like the doorway that kind of gave me permission to really accept my love of still life. Velasquez, because what I'd known of him had nothing to do with that painting, and the bowl, that piece of cloth, just the way he painted her turban, even the tilt of her head of the maid, really started to speak to me about the domestic space and the mundane space that Norman Bryson talks about in his book. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Really, suddenly, I realized that the presence of that kitchen maid suddenly was quite literally like a portal, like people talk about the importance of representation, but the fact that I maybe was not ever seeing or would not ever see Velasquez's paintings truly, if I hadn't have seen this painting, it really gives me pause. Like, there was something about this whole historical discourse, a history of painting, the Christ figure being in the background, not in the foreground, this consideration of labor in this space, the fact that her ear is tilted towards the conversation. There's even a politic to this painting that I just find striking. And, when I saw it with you guys at the museum, was the first time I'd seen it in person. There are several versions and studies, but I had never seen this painting before. And then the fact that it was next to the Cotán, like, it was a really, really profound, like, unforgettable art viewing experience for me. I'll never forget that. And the Zerberon, let's not forget that.
No, that's right. Yeah, exactly.
Like, I was weak in the knees from the whole thing. I was like, this is amazing.
Yeah. Well, Michael, I know, once again, I mean, what a tremendous viewing experience you gave all of us. And Cauleen, I would just echo, I mean, seeing those pictures together and having the chance to really meditate on the significance of the Sánchez Cotán within his own historical time, and then trying effectively, in my research process and writing, to see the work through your eyes, that the Velasquez picture that we were just looking at is such an important link to help really understand the genre of still life as a space that, as you mentioned, within art history still today is a space really relegated to voices conventionally marginalized. So, who in art history has tended to make still lifes? Often women artists, often artists of color, and thinking about how Velasquez, pushes those still life elements forward, and the way that Sánchez Cotán is really able to transcend the humility, or even we could say to make such a profound virtue of these very, humble subjects, that he also is really pushing forward to the limits of the picture plane. Really helped me think, push me to think hard about why we've let ourselves off so easy in overlooking, again, to paraphrase the Norman Bryson seminal text on still life, why do we overlook these overlooked contributions to the history of art? And what do they have to tell us if we're willing to pay more attention? And I think your film, which is just so breathtakingly, poetic, elegant, meditative, really helps us pay attention to things that that I think we often don't give enough time and respect to.
Absolutely. And as a reminder to our audience tonight, you can see the full video on the virtual exhibition webpage on the San Diego Museum of Art's website. And you can see it in full screen. And you can also see some gallery shots of what the space looks like. I mean, we turned a historic gallery, typically devoted to portrait painting of the 16th through 19th century, and turned it into a viewing theater, and it transformed the space. And the three of us spent quite a bit of time in there the last couple of days before before the installation was completed. Some of the conversations that we had were really enlightening, and but also we got to hear from Cauleen about her practice. And Cauleen, if you would like to, I mentioned I had a picture from your studio. Thank you for sending that.
Sure.
I can share my screen, and maybe you could talk a little bit about your thinking and your practice.
Yeah, so that snap is just like I set up this backdrop behind this box that I had fabricated by this really amazing carpenter, who I showed him a picture of the Cotán painting. And then I just painted out on my studio wall about the approximate size that I remembered it or sort of experienced it as a painting, and gave him these very strange dimensions on a 2-dimensional drawing. And I told him I want you to build the box. I want you to build the perspective into the box. Like I can't actually make my camera see that shelf the way that Cotán painted it. It's like all painting of like rendering, there's always like a cheating and distortions that go on to make it feel right on that 2-dimensional surface. And I was really interested in that cheating that goes on in these paintings, like his way of painting them. And so I asked him to build it to look like it looks, like the fast read you get when you see that void, like to build that shape, so that I wouldn't even really have to light it in order for it to produce the dimension and like the portal into the darkness. And he really took it on. He actually thought it was like a little bit bananas, and built this beautiful, beautiful object for me. I couldn't believe what he managed to pull off. And I wish there was a picture of the back so that you could see how cantilevered and sort of like how he had to sort of trick the box into being a box. And then he built that stand so I could move it around, because it's actually huge. It's about 4 feet tall, that box. So I had that fabricated months, like not that long after our first meetings where we solidified that we committed to doing this. And then it just sat in my studio for quite some time. I would just go in and stare at it and was just completely terrified of, because it really made me think of Cotán. I painted it about 6 different colors, Michael. I painted it to look like the Cotán shelf, like the painterly. And then I arrived at this color, this gray, which is literally 18% gray, which is it's like a test card that you use in photography to register contrast. It just seemed like the right thing. It seemed like the right way to assert my own sort of like discipline, but also really respect, the painter's discipline, which they're very different, filmmaking and painting,
We had a number of conversations about how the color through the way that you lit the box and through different filters, you were able to really create an amazing array of colors because of you had arrived at this 18% gray that seemed to be a bit of a chameleon, no?
Yeah, no, thanks for bringing that up. It's like, because it's the absolute neutral exposure point, it kind of becomes the perfect surface to reflect color and light. So like once I started playing with the film gels, which are just sort of like cellophanes that you put in front of the lights, and playing with the color temperature of the light itself, it was just amazing how the box just started to really glow, and how it just accentuated its own shadows. It did so much work for me, the object. And then it really became this site of contemplation for me, and where I told you guys, I played around with like still lifes and arranging objects and all this stuff. And then every time I looked at the box, I just thought, well, this is it, and that could also just be sort of like the contemporary impulse as well, but that's what I arrived at. But the color, that 18% gray, definitely produced, the idea is that it's neutral, but actually it's, it becomes completely emotive and reflective, you know?
I'm sharing my screen here, which is a still from the video, and you can see. I don't know if you'd like to describe maybe what's happening.
Sure. So there's the box that you see, and like the it's framed so that you can only see the shelf itself. And I was really trying to mimic Cotán's composition, but in the background, I thought, well, maybe the best way to get to the void is to actually approach it. Like, we don't just arrive at that total darkness right away. So this very old-fashioned photographic gradient, it's just like a screen printed sheet that used to be used in analog photography, that goes from blue to black. I purchased and hung it back there as almost like as a horizon line to suggest that there is something out there, that it may be unattainable or unreachable, but there is something. And played around with that, like creating depth with that, as well as creating depth and dimension with the box itself. So there's like that sheet behind it, which also has lights on it. There are lights on the box, and they're all being, over time in the course of the video, tweaked and changed in color and temperature.
And the video itself is 30 minutes long, and it plays on a loop in our gallery, and it begins. Now you actually appear once or twice in the video, and then maybe once at the end where your presence is implied. We can also hear you moving around the studio.
Right.
But one of my favorite parts of the video is one of the earliest shots is kind of a self-portrait of you, and I don't know if I'm reading too much into this, but the creativity of lighting these candles, it has so much meaning, but it's also meditative, and it's a beautiful image.
Well, thank you. I mean, yeah, maybe maybe like this is the point at which I have to release the image to you, the viewers. You know, Victoria and I were talking about so many still lifes. So it's a direct quote of a painting, a contemporary painting by Gerhard Richter. But it's also definitely in so many ways also speaking to painting and its relationship to film and light itself in terms of foot candles. Like, that is the only light. The light that you're seeing illuminating that image is only coming from the candle. Which in cinema, it's only possible because of digital technology. Now I'm nerding out on you, but
yeah, that's great.
A lot of sort of like material things I was thinking about in terms of light and paint and film and then digital, that I thought Gerhard Richter's painting also may have been thinking about in terms of photography and things like that. So that's.
But there are no hands in those Gerhard Richter candle paintings, Cauleen.
No, that's true.
We got you there.
That's a good point, Victoria.
No, but that's all the more meaningful.
Right. Well, you know, he's picking his moments, and cinema allows you to actually be in time, right? So, and also, yeah, the hand itself, it's so easy to remove from filmmaking in a way. You know, I deliberately make my films really kind of jagged and a little bit like what I always want the viewers to see the edges of things. But this film, because it was a clock, it's exactly 30 minutes, because I was dealing with this light and a certain kind of precision of depth that I wanted. There weren't that many ways to actually make it a tactile or to suggest that it was a tactile. The sound and then this particular intervention are the two things where that happens, I think.
Well, and I also, I love the fact that in thinking about Sánchez Cotán, there's the presence or implied presence in the Sánchez Cotán. Someone has been there hanging the fruit. Someone's been there slicing the melon. So we can almost imagine hearing the artist in the studio like we hear you.
Certainly, yes. I think I do.
But if I'm remembering correctly, I think that's something that the three of us talked about together, was this translation from one medium to another, not just spanning these centuries of time, but also, you know, creating a film in dialogue with the painting is very different than creating a painting in dialogue with the painting. And what does it mean, Cauleen, as you were saying, to, you know, work with a time-based medium, and how do you, what considerations do you bring to bear? And Michael, I remember you, mentioning that not only do we have this implied presence, human presence, but also an implication of the passage of time with the different, you know, stages of ripeness of the still life elements present in the Sánchez Cotán.
Yeah, that's right. And then Cauleen, towards the end of the video, you blow the candles out.
Right.
So I encourage everyone to go to watch the video, because you'll also hear the audio, which is very subtle, but it's also part of the clock. And maybe I'll just skip ahead to two of the last images. And Cauleen, these images, we miraculously find ourselves outdoors with brilliant color, and there's music playing, and there has been music playing throughout at intervals throughout the video, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, yeah. I mean, once I arrived at, to me, the intervention of responding to Cotán using film really was about time. It was about how he was thinking about it, how I can think about it. And so making it 30 minutes long, and at every 5-minute interval, there's an interruption, I guess, or an intermission in which there's music. But the explosion to go outside at that moment, to me, really was a kind of release, I guess, and a kind of maybe my own interpretation of that painting, and the sort of the recontextualizing of these natural objects, the cabbage, the melon, the cucumber, the quince, and just going outside, and not in a landscape fashion, because I never really, the camera isn't functioning as in terms of like, suddenly now I'm going to make a grand landscape. It's doing the same thing that we were doing with Cotán in his studio with this painting, which is close looks at beautiful, humble things, you know. I mean, a lot of it has also to do with just my training as a filmmaker, and wanting to give the audience something like pleasure, even though it's a very austere it's a very austere video up to a point. So if someone actually does sit with it, this moment is the reward, I think. Yeah.
I'm showing one of the last of the images is a moving shot of sunflower and a bee, and there's music still playing at this point. Is that right?
Yeah, yeah. It's a Minnie Riperton, I think. It's this song called "Le Fleur," which she's famous for her very high pitched voice. It's like 3 octaves above the highest note on the piano. Her voice is just sort of soaring at this moment, I believe. Yeah.
And when you were thinking about the music selections, how do you see the music playing a role in what you're trying to say?
Yeah, you know, I wanted my film to do something that the Velasquez painting that we were looking at did for me, which was invite me into the conversation of the artwork. And it did that by having this figure, this maid figure who's dark like me, African, be in the center of the painting, to be the central figure of the painting, the active figure of the painting. And I thought this is so important. This is so important, the way that her presence has allowed me to look at and study an entire sort of like period and place and time. And I wanted my film, as austere as it was, to do the same thing. And so each 5 minute, at every 5 minutes, there's a musical interruption, and that music is a Black woman artist, I think they're all American, singing songs about nature in some form, whether it's Mary J. Blige saying, chastising her lover because he's not bringing her roses, which is like the cutest song ever, or Odetta, great folk singer, singing about the green pastures of North America, or Minnie Riperton singing La Fleur. Oh, now I'm spacing out. I'm so embarrassed. Nina Simone. Yes. So I thought, oh, when you hear this voice, if someone walks in at a moment when they're hearing this voice, they're gonna do a double take. I can anticipate a potential viewer thinking that maybe this isn't what they thought it was about at all. Maybe it's about something else or something more. Maybe it's something for them. And that comes from the contemporary nature of the music, the really vast kind of selection. There's no one particular kind of music, but it's also very specifically that it's these iconic African-American divas, basically, that those are the voices that you're hearing. It just seemed, I think a lot of my questions around addressing the Cotán film was, how do I do this in my own work for someone like me, who I was when I met this painting or when I first encountered this painting? How do I do that? So those are and then the clock, the 30 minutes and the 5 minute intervals, I just sort of really thought about not so much getting lost in time. Like I never feel lost or disoriented when I'm looking at Cotán. I actually feel like it's a world in which there are tasks being done, there's work being done, there's things that need to get, it's a kitchen, right? Or it's a pantry. It's domestic space, so someone is working. And so I didn't want there to be this idea of like a kind of meditation in which one loses oneself, but more about a kind of real awareness of where we are and what we're doing, Does that make sense?
It makes perfect sense. And I was thinking about a conversation that you had last week that was, I found, incredibly stimulating and important, and just the selections of music seem to really have so much to do with joyous celebration, and but we're also at this period of time right now where we're looking at Black Lives Matter and injustice, and I don't know if you want to say anything about that, but we had such a great you had such a great conversation last week on a different webinar. I was just blown away. So.
Well, I mean, thinking about all of that in relationship to this film, I am compelled to say that, this is like a kind of amazing time that we're in right now. The activism that's happening right now is a real movement. It's not simply protest. It's not simply discontent. There is a vision about how to do things differently. And it's coming from the ground up. The Senate is rushing around trying to write bills to placate these angry Black women in the streets who have educated thousands of people to have the same talking points and to have their banners all speaking about defunding the police. It is truly a marvelous time to reflect and to listen to them and to learn. Like, this is a moment in history. This is not a blip. It's really exciting for us to be witnessing this and to be a part of it. So one of the things, though, about all of this activism that I've noticed, and it's changing gradually, is like as movements do, is that there is an absence of music and culture on the streets, and I'm so acutely aware of how important it is for there to be culture for the people who are doing the work of envisioning our future. You know what I mean? It's just absolutely crucial, and I think it's also really crucial that those artworks that they might encounter don't tell them what to think or how to feel, but instead allow them and give them the space to return to a kind of human mode that's not sort of in contestation with power. So, I mean, this painting, this quince and cabbage and melon and cucumber, to me is like this, an audacity of humility. You know what I mean? It's just a collision of humble and, I don't know, just a kind of brazen announcement of a will to look at things, to think about things. And I think we need that right now. We need the will to look and to listen and to be really present with what's happening right now. I hope the installation does that. And if I could just say one thing about the installation, I'm so grateful for everybody who's come and listen to this. I really am. But I implore you to please go and experience the installation itself, because it's not just about the film. It's the conversation that the painting and the film are having together. It's a very dark room, very dark, but there are places to sit and there are places to rest. And there's a reason for that darkness. It's a way of separating you. And maybe I'm inviting people to enter into a kind of liminal void space to think about these things, to let this painting and hopefully my film take you wherever they want to go. And it's so important. It's so much about the space. Mm-hmm. So I hope you watch the video online, of course, but please go visit it.
Cauleen, I mean, that's so affirming and uplifting to hear you speak about this painting and about this work in our present moment. And I absolutely agree. You know, when we were installing already in March, we had this sense that coronavirus was spreading, and I thought, oh my gosh, this is just coming at such a perfect time when, we're facing this uncertainty and, creating this opportunity for people to have space to reflect on what's important and, how to go forward. And I think, with the additional context of this profound moment that we are seeing and participating in, and that's really revealing itself to be, potentially watershed moment in terms of, the advancement of social justice in our country, and we hope beyond. I think this project also really brings forward that, the space of the museum needs to be a space where all are welcome and all feel represented, and where voices historically marginalized can be brought forward in sometimes surprising contexts. And so even more than we thought a few months ago, I think this work is so urgent for this time in ways that I think will surprise us perhaps. But I, for one, will be beating a path back to San Diego in July. So I look forward to that.
Yeah, me too. Thank you. Thanks for saying that, Victoria. It's important.
Yes, thank you so much. And yeah, I really look forward to seeing both of you back here so that we can see the exhibition again. I think Kate would like to share some questions with us now. And before we do that, I just want to thank Cauleen again for joining us. We appreciate your time. Thank you, Victoria, so much. This has been, both of you, this has been such an amazing experience and a lot of fun too, especially during installation and talking to both of you about it. So thanks again.
The whole process has been an absolute pleasure and an honor. Thank you, Michael. Thank you, Victoria. It has been a dream come true, and an opportunity to make something I don't know I would have been able to make without this space. So thank you.
We don't have any questions yet. Do any of our viewers have anything they would like to ask? Just put out the call, we'll see.
Okay, yeah, great.
LeJan says she has one, but she can't type fast enough, so it's coming.
Oh, okay, it's on its way.
Carrie said, can you share the significance of the chairs in the installation?
Oh yeah. Well, because it is really important to me, the space that the films exist in public museums. It's sort of very important to me that my work lives in museums and that it's accessible to anybody who wants to go into those spaces. And then when they encounter my films, it's important to me that they know that I really want them to spend time there, to sit down. So the weird chairs, the very weird chairs, they're refurbished chairs, like domestic dining table chairs, with added accessories to kind of anthropomorphize them. They're there as an invitation to that your presence is welcome, and that it's a place you can actually just sit for as long as you want. It's not just, there are benches to sit on if you have like a kind of back that needs a bench, but if you want to just sit there as long as you want and ignore everything in the room, that's what those chairs kind of suggest you can do. You know what I mean? But hopefully you might look up at the Cotán painting, which in the way we lit it and everything, it just leaves me breathless. And there's this particular chair that Victoria sat in while we were installing. And then she's like, this is where this chair needs to be. I could just sit here all afternoon. And so that was the idea. It was just about a kind of actual, maybe domestic relationship with these artworks, as opposed to an institutional one. Yeah.
Thank you. We have a couple of comments coming in. Roxana says, congratulations to Cauleen. Looking forward to meeting you in person soon. And thanks to Michael and Victoria for all the process and for sharing with us.
Thank you.
LaDan says, thank you all for such a stimulating conversation. Cauleen, I just wanted to thank you for taking us through your process. I'm particularly drawn to the way you took your personal experience of this painting and then magnified it piece by piece. It's as though you took each humble element and then magnified its humility, if that makes sense, in the film. The quietness, the comfort with the time, the slow changes of color, image, all of it. It's very moving how it, with the careful selections of music, brings on a truly visceral reaction in the viewer/listener. So thank you for that. I guess it's not a question so much as me marveling at how you did it.
Thank you. Thank you so much for that.
And we have one more question that came in. Anne asks, is there a connection between Cotán and the plague?
Well, that's interesting because the Cotán was at one point the Sánchez Cotán was in the royal collection, and while Velasquez was the chief royal painter, which meant that he was also the decorator and curator of the royal collection. So he was responsible for hanging the Sánchez Cotán. And he did so at a time when there was a recurrence of the plague that swept through Madrid and would later sweep through Seville. So, you know, it was back in these days, the pandemic was fairly common, and Sánchez Cotán, and of course we think of Zurbarán. And Zurbarán's son Juan, who was an excellent still life painter, died at a very young age because of recurrence of the plague. So yeah, it's all connected.
Thank you. Looks like we have two more. One's a comment, one's a question. The question is, it's amazing how this conversation has changed my way of viewing this painting. How did you come to think the film would teach us so much about still life paintings? And that's from Sandra.
Oh, I'm not sure I did. I knew that the painting was teaching me something about film. That maybe that's the thing. You know what I mean? And then just trying to speak back to it. I'm glad it's working. Is all I can say. Because it's just the process was a little bit mysterious, just like the painting. So it was much more about trying to understand what the painting was doing.
I'll just chime in and say on my side, I mean, I love so much art. I have such broad tastes and passions with art. And I think sometimes when you research a particular period in depth, you stop seeing what is transcendent about it. And so, you know, when Cauleen and I worked in this previous context and she expressed this interest in, you know, my primary area of research, I thought, oh my God, here is a chance to get out of my own way and, you know, think differently about the field I'm actually most passionate about. But in some ways, you know, when you get too deep into the footnotes, you miss the opportunity to bring more people along with what's compelling and what's still relevant about these objects that, you know, persist centuries later.
You know, you're really making me think about something, which is that I without your invitation, I would have never thought that I could enter into this conversation, because there's something about the way that art gets historicized that makes it starts to feel as if it doesn't belong to you anymore. You know what I mean? Which sort of speaks to what you're saying about, like, you stop seeing the amazingness of it. There's nothing, everything about this painting is still so contemporary and interesting and edgy, even now, you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
And it's actually made me think so much about looking further back in terms of materials or things or people or places to have a conversation with, that it's all there for us, you know.
I should just add that, I mean, we started talking about just doing something with 17th century still life, and, you know, it's really Michael's openness and San Diego Museum of Art, you know, willing to take on the two of us, mostly you for the better, me, you know, question mark. But, you know, my hats off to San Diego Museum of Art for, yes, you know, being open to pursuing this project. And I think it's really opened up a lot for me personally, and I hope for others as well.
Yeah, thank you. I share that sentiment.
We have one more comment and then a very quick question. The comment is, I have enjoyed this so much and felt transported through time, enjoying your film at home and knowing the Cotán so well. It was like being transported through the Cotán through to your work, and with the music and outdoor part at the end left me feeling totally transported and uplifted. Truly moving experience, and looking forward to seeing it in person. That's from Carolyn. Then Jay had a question. Do you feel a distinction in inspiration level or investigative approach between being inspired by artworks that are done by contemporary artists versus late artists whom you have less access to?
You know, I used to, but now I really don't. And now I actually think that this experience has really convinced me that, like, one of the things that started to happen with this painting is I just started to think of Cotán as an artist in his studio, like my painter friends now. And I was like, what was he doing? Oh, wow, he had these like, you know, painters like pin up photographs that they work off. He had models and images he was working off. I started to think of him as a painter, you know what I mean? And practicing his art. And so now that's one of the things that I took away from this, is that that's what I meant when I said sometimes you feel like it doesn't belong to you. Now I don't feel that way. Now I feel like I have to be really sensitive to the fact that there was a maker here, just like me, you know.
Great. Well, I think we'll wrap up. Thank you so much, Cauleen, Victoria, Michael, for leading us through this conversation. Thank you to Circle members for attending, and for our guests for joining us tonight. And be sure to check out Cauleen's exhibition, Juan Sánchez Cotán and Cauleen Smith, Mystical Time and Deceptive Light, on our website or at the museum, where it will be on view until January of 2021. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you. Thanks, everybody.
Yeah.
Thanks, Michael. Thanks, Kate. Thanks, Victoria. So good to see you.
Likewise. Thank you. Thank you, Michael, Kate.
Bye.
Bye.